Lights, camera, lawyers. Legal issues that video content creators encounter that you might not have thought about. On this episode of Legit Podcast Pro. Hello, everybody. My name is Gordon Firemark. I am known as the podcast lawyer, and this episode of Legit Podcast Pro might be a little different from many. I'm going to be doing something a little different, recapping my presentation from the Podcast Movement Conference that was held in late August in Washington, D.C. So what we're going to be doing today is hopefully shedding a little bit of light on some of the legal issues that video creators face, both the familiar and those that you might not have thought about. And the discussion is going to highlight these legal issues and emphasize their importance and help you understand how to protect your content, avoid disputes, and ensure compliance with the law. The goal here is really to equip you with the knowledge to think like a professional, to plan strategically, and act with legitimacy. And this mindset will help you to position yourself for growth and profitability. So let's dive right in and start with a crucial belief that I hold. It is that getting your show or your channel's business and legal affairs in order is the most effective step that you can take to position yourself as a professional who is ready for growth and profit. And to do that, what it involves is thinking legit, planning legit, and behaving legit. That is, thinking like the professionals do, getting into that mindset, planning things out, even though no battle plan ever really survives the first contact with the enemy. You want to have made a plan. It's the act of planning that gets you prepared and puts you in position to improvise and adapt and overcome any kind of hurdles. So by the end of this presentation, I hope you'll have a clear understanding of these legal aspects and how to manage things effectively. And, so thinking like a pro, planning like a pro, and then doing things the way the pros do, behaving like a professional and getting these legal affairs under control and in order. So let's just dive right in, and we're going to talk about intellectual property. This really is the cornerstone of your creative work. Copyright issues are often the most immediate concern, encompassing music and background audio and video clips and artwork and stuff. So understanding this is really key to protecting your own work product, as well as respecting the rights of other copyright owners, so you can avoid problems like DMCA takedowns, YouTube policy violations, copyright strikes, and those kinds of things. So we're going to dive right in and get into copyright. Obviously, when we talk about copyright, the first thing that podcasters all think about, let's face it, music, right? You want to hear those opening strains of Back in Black as the opening for your show right now. But you have to beware more of other kinds of uses. There's background audio. If you're out shooting video in a public place and there's music playing, that stuff may find its way into your programming, and you need to know that you're going to have to get some clearance rights for that. But also anything else that might appear in the background of what you're doing. Maybe that's, a poster, a sculpture, a painting, something like that you use as part of your set decoration. Well, guess what? You need to think about this stuff pretty carefully. One interesting case involved a story quilt by an artist named Faith Ringgold. And when that quilt, a poster, photograph of that quilt, was on the background of a setting in which a scene from a show called Rock that was on Black Entertainment Television, BET. It was on screen for a total of 27 seconds over about 3 episodes. And the artist, Ms. Ringgold, thought she better sue, and she did, and she won. The court said that this use was more than merely an incidental use, and it did, in fact, amount to copyright infringement. And this principle applies not just to music, but to visuals, anything that shows up in the background of your scene. Now, the folks at BET, they thought for sure this was a fair use. But, well, the court said no, it wasn't, and Ringgold won that lawsuit. So this is the kind of thing that you really do need to be thoughtful and careful about as you move into making your content. But there are some other kinds of things that we have to think about. Here's another situation that comes up as fair use pretty often. It's the reaction video. If you are reacting to other people's content, then what you're doing could be considered copyright infringement, because if you're playing a big chunk of that content. But the reaction video is an interesting case because YouTube has decided in its infinite wisdom that reaction videos are fair use, period, end of discussion. Now, that is motivated. There was a case involving a reaction video, and YouTube has now decided that all reaction videos are going to be treated as fair use. If you get a takedown notice from a content creator, YouTube puts it back up at your request if you say it's fair use. I'm not sure that all reaction videos are in fact fair use, but this is certainly something you want to think about if you are doing reaction videos in your podcast. So think about that. Now, here's the trademark issue that can come up in podcasting. Obviously, you want to think about three things. One, choosing your branding and titles carefully. Choosing something that is distinctive and not merely descriptive so that you can protect it with the trademark registration is of critical importance. And also, you want to be aware of how trademark works because you don't want to be infringing on others. That is, don't choose a title of a show that's already been chosen. Same goes for a title of a YouTube channel. If somebody's already started using that brand for their own content as an indicator of their source or origin, you're going to create confusion. That's the kind of thing that trademark is really designed to protect against. So all of this means that you need to think about licensing and permission and consent whenever you are using stuff that comes from other people. And this begins right away with guest releases. This is sort of my evangelical message, I guess you could say, is every time a guest appears on your show, they should have signed or agreed to a guest release agreement that gives consent to be recorded, consent to be broadcast, and transfers ownership and control over the content you're creating together into you, the podcaster's hands. You need permission and a license for any third-party content that makes it into your show, whether that is archival footage, stock footage, royalty-free music. There is a license with royalty-free music, and you want to download that and keep it on file. But more importantly, you want to read it. Check those license terms and scope carefully, because there have been quite a number of folks who have bought a one-time use license from an online music licensing agency or clip agency, only to find out after they included it in many episodes that what they've created needed a license for each single episode because it was a single-use license. So think carefully about that. But also, when do you need a location permit or a location release? These are two different things. You need a location release when you're using somebody's private property with their permission, hopefully. They're giving you permission to enter upon the property, to use the property for your filming, to make adjustments, modifications. Usually you promise to restore things back to the way you found them. And those agreements will also include provisions for repair for any damages that occur, those kinds of things. You need a release when you're filming on private property. When you're filming in public locations, you may need a location permit, a filming permit. Now, it depends on the location, so you're going to want to check this out. But things like national parks, public venues are often permit places. Sometimes if you're shooting video and you're using more than just handheld camera, you'll need special permission from the city, because you might be blocking a sidewalk or a driveway or those kinds of things. So you're going to need a permit from the city, and oftentimes they have requirements that you provide a level of security, those kinds of things. So think hard about the licensing permissions and consents that you need as you're bringing video in, because your video means more complicated, complex productions and the more elaborate stuff. So defamation is the false statement about a person that's made and published that causes that person's reputation or standing in the community some kind of harm or damage. And you need to think about this. In the electronic media, we generally are talking about libel. Slander is the other version of defamation that occurs when you're in a spoken word, small group, one-to-one, one-to-few kind of scenario. So this comes up in the podcasting world where, there are hit pieces. There was a podcaster who decided that she was going to take down Cardi B, and she accused the artist of all kinds of various improprieties, drug abuse, promiscuity, having engaged in sex work, those kinds of things. Cardi B sued her, and after a fairly lengthy trial, she did win a $4 million judgment that effectively bankrupted that podcaster. And those are the kinds of things that we need to be thoughtful about. But even a simple juxtaposition can sometimes be considered defamatory or invasive of privacy. For example, think of an image where we're illustrating an article about shoplifting by senior citizens to make ends meet. And the article is presented with an image of two older women walking arm in arm in a mall with shopping bags in hand and those kinds of things. Well, neither of those two women were the ones that were shoplifting, but the implication from that juxtaposition with that article certainly suggests that they are. And if their friends or family or a community saw them, they would certainly be embarrassed, if not ashamed, and maybe even injured by that. Here's another scenario where a juxtaposition of a caption with a photograph. Now, I will be very clear to say this is not a situation where a lawsuit actually did emerge. In fact, I found this image and caption and was amused enough by it to bring it and put it into a slideshow. This is a photo of Paul Reiser and Jay Leno at an event of some sort. And the caption of the photo says, "At 70, Jay Leno lives modest life with his partner." And for those who don't know, Jay and Paul are both heterosexual men, but this image and the caption could suggest otherwise. And those are the kinds of things we really need to be careful about as we're doing our video production and so on. So reviews, this is another area where we've started to see some action with owners of companies, businesses, suing YouTubers, and presumably podcasters could be in the same line of fire, over their truthful reviews, honest opinions about products and services from those companies. Now, currently this seems to be happening in Australia, where the libel laws are a little different than they are here in the U.S. Here in the U.S., opinion statements are generally considered shielded and protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution. But this is the kind of thing we do need to be thinking about as we're doing our work, and certainly being careful to express that what we're saying is our opinion and your mileage may vary. A little bit of disclaimer can go a long way in these kinds of scenarios. Now, when you're monetizing any kind of content, we need to think about this. If you're doing video, the monetization structure is going to be platform dependent. Let's face it, at whether YouTube will allow you to do baked-in ads, whether you have enough viewership and subscribers to have monetization on the platform. So it's important we know and comply with those platform policies. Now, in the government regulatory arena, we also have to think about these things. Product placements, truth in advertising rules, endorsements, and affiliate disclosures, all required disclosures when they are made in your content. If you have received any kind of compensation or value, even if it's just a free goods or something like that. And I am of the view that pay-to-play podcasting, where guests are paying hosts for access to their audiences, that's an endorsement by the podcaster of the paying guest. And I think that needs to be disclosed to the guest. I certainly know that if I hear an interview and I learn that the guest has paid, that's something I want to know before I decide how much weight to give the value of the guest's statements or the promotion of the guest's book or whatever it might be. Rules promulgated by the Federal Trade Commission recently released its final rule on trade regulation and consumer reviews and testimonials. It's a 163-page document that makes clear all of the responsibilities of anyone promoting a product or service. And if you're appearing on podcasts and paying that host, you will ignore these kinds of rules at your peril. Quick rundown of those rules and regulations. Thanks to ChatGPT, by the way, which did a nice job of summarizing. Disclose your payments. Recognize that what you say may be a testimonial about the product, service, or the person or podcast you're referring to. If there's some financial relationship, it needs to be clear to the audience. If you're not disclosing payments, you will do harm to your reputation and your shows, because listeners do value honesty. So please don't risk their trust or face these legal consequences, which can be significant. Not following these rules will lead to various penalties that you and the podcast host are both at risk if the disclosure isn't made. Bottom line, always be transparent about any payments when you're appearing on a podcast, not just cash, but also any other value exchange. Make sure you're staying compliant and maintaining trust with your audience. And let's go to the next slide. So some emerging issues in the podcasting and digital video space coming up in the field of AI, of course. Not the least of these are the deep fakes. When you do use a person's voice or likeness in an AI generated way to say something they didn't say, to appear in a way that they didn't appear, you are misappropriating that person's name, image, and likeness. And if you're doing that for any kind of a commercial purpose, you can find yourself in some hot water there. But you also may be defrauding your audience and possibly customers if you're putting words in people's mouths and promoting or endorsing you, your product, your political campaign, or whatnot. This can also put the person in a false light, which is an actionable privacy kind of a claim, as well as causing defamation. If the fake thing is something they would never say, and by being portrayed as saying or doing that thing, they are presented in a way that harms their reputation, I would call that libel, and I think that is a big concern. So be careful about these kinds of things. Further in the AI and the generative AI side, we have lots of copyright claims pending right now. The first copyright lawsuit claiming infringement by the training of AI is before the courts and juries right now as we speak in late August. We'll be starting to see some rulings in this, but the basics are, the owners of content are claiming infringement by the training, and the owners and creators of the machines, the AI tools, are claiming it's fair use. And it's going to take some juries and judges and courts over the course of the next few years to really give us the clear answers on this. For right now, I would say be thoughtful and careful about when you use AI-generated material, knowing that it was trained on copyright-protected material. And you don't know, unless you're very, very careful, how much of what you're using in your content generated by AI is coming directly from those. Another concern is that these AI tools are known to hallucinate or have an imagination, we'll say. And when they hallucinate, they may be creating false information that your audience is expecting to be truthful, expecting to rely upon, and so on. Be thoughtful and careful about this. And finally, we have to think about, well, who owns the results and proceeds of material that's made by an AI? Even when you have crafted, and maybe you have great pains to craft a very detailed and careful prompt, the output from the AI machine is not going to be entitled to any kind of copyright protection. And that's something you want to think hard and carefully about when you create it. Make sure there's a sufficient degree of your human original authorship in the work in order for it to be entitled to protection. Otherwise, you create something like a opening music clip or an opening video scene. Somebody else sees it, likes it, knows it's made from AI. They can take it without any consequence. Be careful, be thoughtful about this. So much of my time as a lawyer is spent dealing with collaborations and the necessary eventual and really, always expected breakups that come following or as part of collaborations. I do lots of work in team deals, guest agreements, releases, network deals. Be thoughtful about these. And be thoughtful about negotiating into these contracts the terms that will protect you. We've seen in recent months a number of accusations against very, very big YouTube creators that find them possibly on the side of having to provide indemnification for the things they say and do, and even with the platform themselves. Think about putting into your network deals a morals clause and indemnity, but also if you're a creator, limit that indemnity to the things that you really should be responsible for and not everything. In production deals, likewise, indemnification. If you don't have the authority to control litigations and settlements and things that engage with your content, say the production company or the network has that right, well, you shouldn't be responsible for paying out a settlement that you didn't consent to. So be sure you always have your deals clearly established so that everybody knows exactly what is expected of them and what they can expect from things. And as every lawyer in the world will tell you, you're going to need a podcast prenup of some sort with your co-host, your co-producer, with any of the members, co-owners, the members of your LLC, the creative team, the guests, and so on. Now, these podcast prenups take different forms. It might be the LLC's, operating agreement. It might be a co-production deal or a co-host engagement deal. When you hire independent contractors, make sure that you have these things. And likewise, with every single guest, as I've preached, use a guest release agreement. And please, please, please be sure that you get it in writing. Always try to get these things in writing. Now, writing doesn't necessarily mean a piece of paper with blue ink signatures on it. It can be done electronically through email, signing something on the bottom of a web form or something like that. Do the best you can to make sure you have a clear recording of the party's manifestation of the intent to be bound by the specific terms that are laid out. So, one example of being precise in these kinds of agreements is the need for precision. What is the definition, for example, of the word podcast? I had one client who came to me after having made a very lucrative deal where the sponsor agreed to pay him $1,000 per podcast for advertising. Well, the sponsor provided a credit card, and the podcaster began hitting the credit card every week as each new episode came out, $1,000 per week. Year goes by, $52,000, not bad. I know I wouldn't mind having one or two sponsors along those lines. Well, at the end of a little over a year had passed, the sponsor comes back out of the woodwork and sends the host a very nasty email saying, "You have overcharged me and you owe $51,000 that we had an agreement on $1,000. And if you don't pay up right away, I'm going to get the authorities involved." And so I got to get into it with this sponsor and their attorneys and the regulatory authorities, the police, and so on. And it ended up, there was not a meeting of the minds here because the host thought per podcast meant per episode, and the sponsor thought per podcast meant the whole thing. So it seems like a silly mistake, but these are the kinds of ambiguities that can come back to bite you if you're not careful. So be very careful about these kinds of things. Now, again, please get it in writing. Some other risks and pitfalls in the podcast space and the YouTube video space, especially prank videos. Be very, very careful, because if you commit a crime or you cause somebody an injury or something, the First Amendment freedom of speech thing is just not going to protect you. It's very, very wise when you're doing these kinds of things to use proper disclaimers and lots of safety measures, of course. Don't try this at home. I'm not your lawyer. I'm a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer. Those kinds of disclaimers can be very helpful. When you're doing video live, remember that you're live. You are opening a bigger can of worms because you can't take things back. No takesy backsies. So be very, very extra careful about things that you say in your show. Also, you should know that you can get yourself into some platform trouble with the places where you're hosting your content if you include profanity and banned words or expressions or subject matter that they're considering off limits and those kinds of things. So be very thoughtful about that. And doxing is the revealing of someone's private information, usually home address or phone numbers and things. Please just don't do this. In some places it's a crime. It's certainly not good form, even though it is a way of publicly humiliating and shaming people who say and do things on the web. I think it's a dangerous trend, so don't go down that path. And when filming kids, well, let's just say don't film kids, even out in public, without their parents' permission. Even if it's legal technically to film kids in public, I guarantee you, you're filming at a park somewhere, some kid's parent is going to call the police. And then you're going to spend a lot more time talking to the cops about what's going on and why you're here, even though it's perfectly legal. Just don't do it. Save yourself the trouble. So, some best practices for creators in this space when bringing video or any kind of podcasting. Please think like the pros. Get into that mindset early on of doing as professionals do. Plan things out. Be prepared with a plan and knowing where you're going so you can get there most effectively. And finally, do what the professionals do. And what that means for me is followed us on this little framework here that lays out the basic building blocks of a strategic approach to getting your podcasting business and legal affairs in order quickly, easily, and effectively. You start with building your foundation with a business structure, an LLC, a corporation, or a partnership agreement or something. Next, build out your team structure so that everybody knows what's expected of them and what they can expect, and the big what happens if questions. Next up, build out your intellectual property strategy, which starts with awareness and understanding, but also protecting your work and respecting the work of others. And then finally, you can build out a client and customer strategy with good, solid contracts that articulate exactly how things are going to go so you can not just convince them to pay you, but so that you get to keep the money that they pay you. So I hope this is all making sense and resonating for you. And I will just invite you once again to remember the key premise that I have. Get it in writing, says every lawyer ever. And know that getting your shows or channels, business and legal affairs in order is really the most effective step that creators can take to position themselves as professionals who are ready for growth and profit. You can do it. You can get this done. You can, of course, hire a lawyer. I'd be delighted to help you out if that's your approach to things. But if you're not one to hire it out, you can do it yourself. Yes, you can, if you have the right forms and templates and guidance and resources and instructions. If you'd like to know more about that, reach out to me. Find out how by visiting gordonfiremark.com, where I've got a lot of information about all of that stuff. So thank you for being with me today, and thank you for watching or listening to this episode of Legit Podcast Pro. I'll see you again really soon. Next week, we'll be back with our ordinary kind of programming. Until then, keep on podcasting, keep on being legal, legit, and doing things the way the pros do. Have a good one.